I think it just turned 7, depending on where you are in the world, I think. But nonetheless, I think it's in and around there. Haven't had any questions related to the webcast at all, so I'd like to pick something that I'd like to talk a little bit about anyway, and see how that fits. The two words I'd like to talk about, let's say, in terms of these two words, kind of a relationship between these two words. One is kinship and one is belief. We're blessed with a whole bunch of theories about spiritual growth and how that works and how important it is. And these theories are extremely valuable from my perspective. Unfortunately, we don't have agreement amongst these theories, and that is to be understood as normal. The dilemma with belief is that we register what we believe has to be true, and then we look at other belief systems as improbable or not real, or it can't be true because ours doesn't really think that way. It's really interesting. This occurs all over the world, and our intensity around it is mighty, tremendously strong. However, when you're talking about internal spiritual growth or universal internal development, the implication there is to engage with higher states, and these higher states are more important than anything. If you could just put some thought on that for a second and realize that our tremendous way of seeing things in terms of belief and our particular understanding serves as kind of a movement towards, or a ladder from our perspectives, whoever that may be, whereby we can actually think that we're closer than anybody else to a certain level of, let's say, understanding first. And that makes us personally feel better, well, at least as if we're attempting our best to come face to face or engage with higher states, by definition, relating to our belief again. There's a dilemma here, and the dilemma is really interesting. Some of the folks that I've met that I've been lecturing about for a number of years, that I've been very fortunate to meet, have a different view of how our relationship with higher states come together. And that view is through experience. They engage with higher states, and they have a perception that relates to their view of what higher states mean and how the other individual is involved with higher states. It's kind of a middle ground there in a bit of a way, because in early goings, it's really based on what you can do versus what's going on inside of you. Everybody likes to think of an engagement with higher states as a science. I like that idea personally, but in fact, if you relate that way of seeing things as a science from a perspective, you relate to it in terms of what you think might be valued or true versus someone else's experience. It's really a bit very strange how we do these things, but nonetheless, it makes perfect logical sense. If we study things, and those things that we study approve of what we regurgitate, being the regurgitation of everything we studied, then that means we must be in and around right, because those who really have had numerous experiences that relate to what they've written down or spoken about seems to be at least in and around a version of truth. I think that that's really kind of valuable at that stage of development, because at least there is a level of encouragement that can be given by the encounter that you personally have with how you see the world based on what you've studied, and hopefully some relative experience. The dilemma with these two levels, one where you have no experience and then where you begin to have experience, is that there is a highly personalized version of self-validation that occurs. It's a dilemma. It doesn't mean you're either right or wrong. It just means that there's a relationship. Your experience has a relationship with what you believe. That doesn't devalue your experiential rapport with your belief, but it does, in any thoughtful person's mind, begin to make you wonder about the next step, where people begin to think that other people haven't got the right belief because it doesn't match theirs. It's a real dilemma. The experience that I've had in meeting some of these able beings who can perceive insight into another state deeper than the personalized versions of what must be true based on physical, emotional, and mental considerations through the eyes, through the ears, through the sensing mechanism only, they apparently are looking at something deeper. Often we call that the soul. It's almost unbelievably difficult to believe that an individual can perceive deeply into another's soul. I talked to a gentleman, Serge Pinot and myself, talked to a gentleman in India who talked about the relationship that we have with engaging with the past, the present, and the future. He could read the future. He was very good at it, actually, because of his link up with another state. And he said, in answer to a question that I asked him with respect to whether you could actually perceive those chakras or Sephiroth, or whatever you want to call them, in another person, he said, no, that's only capable, people only with that are saints can do that. I know a number of people who aren't really candidates for sainthood that can actually do that. So it's a bit nerve-wracking, but nonetheless, that is associated with a belief, and a viable one as far as this individual is concerned. But in some of these other folks who can actually perceive the soul, and I'm talking about those tunnels or valves through which energy flows, is often called the soul from many people's point of view. Not from the point of view of some beliefs, though. Once again, here we go. Those folks don't seem to be enamored with the belief that they are a part of. Well, that's a statement maybe that could be a little thought-provoking. Those folks, if they can perceive inside you and know you are consciously aware of another being's soul structure or chakra system, and I'm not talking about how the personality sees it. I'm talking about how it manifests in another. And you can actually notice whether it's more able than you or not. Doesn't matter. You notice something that is akin to a deeper level of understanding of another, no matter what their belief. They don't have to believe like you. They don't have to even believe any of the major beliefs, but they can. And some who do believe in some of the major beliefs on our planet, according to some people, they are called major beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever they may be. Those folks can engage with, and scientific, I might say, belief, because that's just another belief system, backed up, of course, by experience and, trying to be honest with ourselves about what's there and what's not there. Not trying to fulfill what you have learned, but trying to really deeply wonder internally and externally what's really going on as you begin to perceive that internal feature. It is different than the increasing or the broadening of the personality's sensory system, which is eyes, ears, nose, sensing, all the rest of that. It is an actual perception of the energy flowing through an individual in various levels for purposes related to those higher levels, just coming through an individual for the purpose of helping others in their particular development of this soul mechanism, one could say, or a deepening of real perception of flowing energy as opposed to the indicators from our eyes, ears, and sensory system. Initially, those extrasensory methodologies, as everyone knows them, clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, you begin to lose your focal point on the ones that are based on personality. This I know for sure. For sure. You are disengaged internally with them so that you can begin to understand that there is something much deeper than the personality's version of importance based on their capacity to do or make an action in a particular personality extended manner. And this is very disturbing. Well, these higher levels or beings that have them don't want to be known too well by them. They have the capacity of turning them off so others can't see them. That's a bit scary for us because it shows us that we're not as important as we thought we were, number one. And we don't want to believe that because our beliefs are very uncomfortable under those kinds of experiences. It's almost, as I've heard many people say, if they lose their clairvoyance, they must have done something wrong. Absolutely not. It's not real to think you've done something wrong. You may be shifting into another state, or you move into a state where your whole system becomes an eye. Now that is something that nobody would like to have happening all the time because you end up being other people. Now you have to recognize that you are, someone else is engaged in you and you are perceiving them right into the deepest levels of their current existence, not their personality orientation necessarily. It can happen, but their relationship with their soul's flow, the energy coming into these levels so that they can be alive. At that state, there is no interest in judgment, no interest in saying that they're wrong versus right. Because every one of these systems that we have related to belief in any possible way are valuable for the purpose of moving towards a deeper understanding and the commencement of a relationship with a higher state. It's a very profound thing to say. Well, what about this kinship thing that we're talking about? Well, some of these folks that I've met, that some of you have heard me talk about, recognize the relationship with perception of a deeper level, and they automatically almost relate to them as if you're involved with kin, a kind of a family-oriented state. And it's not about the way we think of family. It's more, you're doing whatever work it is you're doing, and they know you're doing that because they're doing the same thing. And it's just, hi, how are you? They don't even know your name, and they don't really want to. Don't, because it's not necessary, not because you're not worthy of something. That's just personality stuff. So that there is no judgment at that level, but recognition that as energy flows through you, you encounter many different kinds of ways of functioning, and you try to learn from it to the best of your ability. And sometimes you can, and other times you come up short. Coming up short is allowed. There's no display of, oh my God, that's not a good, they shouldn't do this or that. Because the rules are related to an opening versus a breaking of the rule, and therefore you're good, bad, or right or wrong. It's a different way of seeing things, this idea of a higher state. This is very difficult for us to allow ourselves to encounter without a number of jaundiced eyes. But it's worthwhile having a jaundiced eye about things. Belief should not be taken automatically, but through a process of increased perception, beginning to understand deeper and deeper, and being willing to understand deeper and deeper without the defense or the need to defend your relationship with various beliefs. Now, we're not brought up like that. And our encounter with our personalities is an automatic defensive structure that's inlaid so that we can survive in this world that we happen to live in. This is a reasonably decent world, and it just has a lot of options. And sometimes we choose options that are not as comfortable as others. And sometimes it's not about comfort or discomfort. It's about making a mistake with respect to the rules of being here. We end up hurting a lot of people, and a lot of people end up hurting us. But that's part of an engagement with learning how to understand things. Because what we do is not always appropriate. What we don't do is not always appropriate. It's very confusing. Attempting to be as honest as you possibly can internally with you is a cue for an internal opening of these vastly talked about centers or chakras or Sephiroth. In the old traditions of fireballs in the Japanese orientation, because they knew fire came through them. So therefore they called them fireballs. Not a bad thing to call them. Call them whatever you want, because everybody does. The dilemma is they're valves, and they're functional, and they're attentive. They express themselves over and over again, energy passing through them is what I mean, for the purpose of maintaining how you really think currently, because we're set up that way. So as each and every one of us grows internally, we begin to moderate a little bit or change something or become a little tighter in our belief system, and we need to be validated by it. It makes us feel as if we haven't made mistakes in our learning. Everybody makes mistakes in our learning, but we try to fill out the story, our mental, emotional stories in our lives so that we can feel comforted by them. It's a huge thing we do, but wow, it also can be a huge thing to broaden out our relationship with this tremendous zone of comfort that we create for ourselves with a kind of sometimes pretty harsh, sometimes pretty soft, but bordering on sometimes respectful. Respectful meaning, wow, maybe that's not as real as I thought it was. Maybe this is not as important as I thought it was. That means you're slightly open to a revision of some kind. And putting your attention on it for a short period of time allows you to reconsider and open your willingness to have another idea crop up. Now, that's a little bit off the path of a kind of determinism that relates to kind of a mechanistic orientation of the personality being there and engaging and needs to be right versus wrong. It's less of that mechanistic kind of view. But when you come up with ideas, surely you think about them. Surely you're curious about them. Why you think the way you do, why you react the way you do under some circumstances. Every now and then, you must be curious about why you do that, I would submit. Many times, we're just plainly defensive. And we have a large screen, personality, energetic form, whatever you want to call it. And life touches it, and we respond to it as if it were our responses were more true than someone else's responses. And sometimes they are, but often they're not. To get to the point where you can watch and see those responses for what they are, not negate them, but not necessarily agree with them, is very difficult. But every time you engage honestly from your perspective, once again, it's an opportunity for a valve or a center to open so that energy can pass into the form that we are, energy form or personality form, and you can become more consciously aware of needing to or not needing to engage in a particular way based on your belief system currently. Because you have one now in an area doesn't mean you have to keep it there, but it may be valuable from time to time to have it there. Sounds like it's a little bit intellectual, but I'm not talking about it as only an intellectual exercise. I'm talking about it as a perception exercise, a willingness to be okay with the quest that moves past how you believe things have to be at any given moment, knowing full well that you will protect that moment. What comes next is okay. Agreement or disagreement, both are fine. Shades of agreement, all fine. Recognition of a deeper level of understanding, something beckoning inside to realize that others and their way of seeing things becomes very complicated. Some very simplistic, Others, a whole stream of variances that are symbolic of their relationship with life. You're not trying to be good or wrong or right or judgmental about your view or another's. You're trying to see where the perception lies, trying to understand from their perspective. Sometimes it doesn't help because you have reactions to that too. From both angles, definitely from one angle of thinking that your perception is definitely better, or how could you be so absolutely wrong about something? Well, you're not absolutely wrong. That's the point. The point is you are shades of engaging with a perspective that you see from your view of the world based on how you have reached this stage in your understanding. And this goes way back in your life. And you suddenly realize that you are trained to devalue and protect your own slotting, your own way of seeing things, because it makes you feel more important and valuable. Then you have to begin to wonder, how come we're so vulnerable to being wrong, to being right? Don't we understand that internal growth is continual? You don't reach a point where you are now the most important person on the planet. That's not real. That's why this concept of kinship becomes really fascinating. If you become internally perceptive and you can really perceive the relationship that you have with others, then the traditional way of love and compassion looks different to you. It's not love and compassion under certain circumstances that validate your way of engaging with life. It's the recognition that that flow is flowing through a system differently than yours, but flowing through nonetheless. Now, I know that's somewhat idealistic, but nonetheless, a reality in relationship to higher states. Can those beings, this is another question that, so many people talk about. Can you be a being in a higher state and make a mistake? Oh, yeah. Can you ever? You're subject to mistakes based on the view of others, plus the view of you. If you cannot allow yourself to perceive a relationship with attempting to do something and finding out it may not have been the option that you might choose, and be okay with that and choose something else, then you are there going to protect how you do things. And you will not be open to options, ever. Well, that's one of the things that we all have in common. It's called being a human being at this level of development. But a movement into understanding differently allows you to move into a state where you recognize that every human being on the planet is in a process of development. Everyone. Wow. If you really look at that, that doesn't taste good, smell good, sound good, look to be good. But when's the last perfect person came around the corner so you could see them? There aren't any. And perfection in the old religious orientation had nothing to do with personality perfection, had everything to do with the ability to handle those higher state forces coming into the individual as they lived on this plane. This is huge. It means, at least partially, in our belief systems, we need a little bit more refinement, respect, a view to being okay with misunderstanding how another thinks. And misunderstanding sometimes leads to reflex reaction. That happens to be everywhere. I realize that. Happens to be in you, happens to be in me, happens to be in everybody. I'm just trying to get you to consider the possibility that theory is only one small aspect of an engagement with growth. Probability is a very scary thing. It means there are many things that may be probable that we haven't even thought of yet. I hope that's true, actually, because the numbers of perfect people on this planet are extremely small, if there are any. But there are many who have engaged with higher states. Many, I would hope 1% of the population, but oh boy, that's way too many, I think. Oh, maybe that's totally unfair. I'll go your route and my route and say, I haven't met many, if any. Perhaps one possibility in my life. I don't know how that being could be so capable. It was beyond my capability to understand that a crown center could be at least a mile plus wide, because that goes against everything that you would read from anywhere. It's not possible, I said, and then ignored me the best I possibly could because the moment was so tantalizing. I had never seen anything like it before in my life, and likely never will again. This individual's sole purpose, only purpose, meaning that, was to engage with those who were in the process of development, to try and help them to broaden out beyond the limits that they had accrued in their lifetimes and in this life, to help them to broaden out. The dilemma with that, this guy could walk among anybody and act as if he had no capacity whatsoever, and you could not perceive it. He had the ability to pull back to the skin. Emptiness, zero. You could not perceive a single so-called auric field. I thought that was fantastic because that gave me such a level of hope in that I realized that we are not developed to a very high degree. That leaves us many more options than we understand and know. And that maybe there's hope that we can grow beyond our understanding and beyond what we know, so that we could then maybe help others to do the same thing. Is it possible? I don't know. That's what I'm counting on. That's what I'm hopeful for. Because of the relationship that a moment or 20 minutes had in the proximity of such an individual. This is the most wonderful thing that can happen to any of us. Now, here's the real interesting thing from my perspective, that such a being of this nature can impact on every individual on this planet. And there are many, some at least, who are in the process of movement towards this level of perception and engagement with higher states living on this planet. That's a key from my perspective. All we can do is help the best we can. And if we can perceive more of that help moving through us, because basically we're all energy beings and we're always glowing with transmission or emanation on various levels. And we affect each other. If we can learn to engage with that kinder aspect of us that is always there, it just doesn't go anywhere. Just because you're grumpy a bit doesn't mean you can't engage with kindness. It means it's just not the first thing on the docket. If you can shift it a bit and intervene on yourself, interject a level of kindness to some degree. And this isn't so simple. It's easy to talk about. This is not simple to engage with. Then energy coming through you is slightly different than it was before. And with great respect, I say this. I'm assuming that I'm not the only individual on the planet that has grumpy modes. It's a big assumption, I know. I realize that. But nonetheless, I've seen it happen to others. And for reasons that are related to just right, wrong, my way is better than your way, blah, 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 all of that sort of stuff. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. Maybe you can learn from other people. And also help yourself to learn, because you are there helping you. You're the closest thing you've got to the best friend you ever had. I mean, let's face it. You will defend yourself forever. You will judge yourself at any opportunity. You'll take credit for almost anything, whenever it is. No, mind you, not all the time, but from time to time. If you can see that, you don't have to be then overly disrespectful to others, because that means you're being overly disrespectful to yourself. You're just reflexively engaging, and that happens to all human beings. Not right, not wrong, not good, not bad. Just, this is what we do. Learning how to comfort ourselves in those places is not so simple. But remember, we're energy beings. We can engage mentally, emotionally, and physically with different levels. We can do that through conversation, internally, externally. It might be helpful, but you need to, consider that. If you don't consider it helpful, then for you, maybe this is a difficult thing to do. I think it's difficult for everybody. You're not the only person on the planet that has difficulty softening down when you don't want to be. That's a level of kindness that everyone talks about, hoping that they will have that in them to do that from time to time. And it is respectful to you, because you are calling upon a higher state when you do this. One very interesting word under those conditions, if you can muster it, would be help. Better give me a hand with this. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. And that person doesn't really deserve it anyway, and I should get them while they're not looking. Or when they're looking. No, it doesn't work that way. But we do that. But when does it ever work? Not very often. And when it does, always leaves a funny taste in your mouth. The concept of kinship that I was talking about earlier is in alignment with the willingness to attempt to soften your relationship with you so that you can be more susceptible to growth. Meaning what? Well, good question. Meaning allowing energy to come in and through you in a way that is not always normal for you, to be able to watch and perceive that it's there and it's real, and you don't need somebody else to tell you it's there. You need the willingness to be okay with having it be there. And it's there all the time. It's not subject to how good you are or bad you are. It's subject to being okay with softening down the form or the iconic resemblance of a statue made of steel that you must defend. Oh, that's the personality I'm talking about. What it believes, what it doesn't believe. Defend it as much as you can so it doesn't change at all because your ideas are better than other people's. Yeah, it's a tough one. I agree. And that may not be doable for us 100% of the time, but it just might be doable from time to time. And that will help us in our expanding, broadening of the ability or willingness to go beyond what we believe has to be true. All truths expand. It's a hard one to swallow. All truths must expand or be defended and never expand past what they already are. Well, maybe there's an in-between about that too. They might be partially true, and I can only understand the broadening in a certain area because I'm too busy defending those ideas in this other area, which seem to be absolutely correct for me, one could say. And until the moment when I can reconsider the value of thinking this way, I will maintain what I believe must be true, one could say. Yep. And you will do that automatically. There's nothing that anybody can do to get you to move out of that state. Absolutely. Same thing happens in science, philosophy, religion, daily life. You can see that what I'm saying is that nobody gets it right. Nobody gets it all wrong. There's an implication here that from time to time you'll do both. Get it right, get it wrong. Become conscious of what you're saying and what you're doing the best you can. You'll see that you can't change your ideas sometimes. They're just too strong in you just yet. Tomorrow, maybe. Keep the willingness to look at tomorrow slightly different, open, even if it takes 100 tomorrows. If you do that, you will likely notice that slowly ideas and concepts are settling into your mind that are slightly different than what were there before. This is a key thing and a very kind thing. And they're there because the mind is broadening. Your perception of physical, emotional, and mental beingness in you, the way you have constructed them, is broadening just a little bit. It's worth a very strong consideration. Then don't tell anybody you're reconsidering. Ah, well, maybe you should. Depending. Because if you belong to a very strong belief construct, you may have difficulties talking to your neighbor about these things. If they already agree with you before, then they're not going to agree with you now. You understand what I'm saying. Thinking is not always considered a valuable thing. Engaging with a higher state is perceiving thought and what you're thinking and rethinking it, considering it, having a dialogue that doesn't exclude, but is inclusive of other ideas and concepts. You may not agree with them, but they're there until your personality's mental structure can actually perceive another level of thought. One could say intuition, sure. Creativity, yeah, sure. But I'm talking about a mind flow that engages, energy engaging with you in the mind, and you are quietly watching to see if anything fits that goes in there, not to see if anything is right versus wrong. Then you're considering it, seeing how it fits in terms of what you already believe or disbelieve, because you will do that automatically. This is not a bad, good thing. It's an automatic thing. Allowing yourself to go beyond what you believe is true is difficult for every human being. But if you begin to watch and see what you really think might be true and try to broaden it out, you are dangerously close to engaging with higher states. If your need is to defend what you already believe is true, then you're in a process that is in a movement towards being more able to reach into higher states. Here's the reason why. Invariably, you will question almost anything over time. It just means that you need time so that you can be the questioner. You can revise and reconsider, not devalue, revise, reconsider, dozens of times if that's what it takes. But you will see eventually the politics of belief, of rightness and wrongness. And eventually you may get to discover that there's more beyond that. It takes a lot of courage to do that. But that courage, if focused on to some degree, will be increased, not for the purpose of only getting your way. It's not real there. That's the way you go. You'll have energy coming into that so that you can then figure out that that may not be the right way to go. From your perspective, it may be a way that expresses itself so that you will see a number of things that you really don't agree with respect to yourself and how you think. because you are practicing questioning, not just to be important, but to really be curious about the next step for you in a relationship with perception, not engaging and validating you as an individual, as a personality. It's a movement into less self-interest, and it appears sometimes to be uncomfortable. But you will move towards another zone of comfort. It's a requirement by our personality to be okay with making another step. These are just small steps of engagements. They only take a lifetime or two. Hardly anything at all. A yogi told me at one point in India. And I laughed my head off. He said, oh, maybe 3. I find that very fascinating. In all respects, attempt to be kind to you if you're disagreeing with yourself. Check it out when you're just a little bit uppity about how right you are. Usually you're defending and protecting something. Why? Why are you doing that? You answer that question. It will help you broaden your relationship with trying to understand something beyond what you understand currently. I know I said that before, but it's very valuable. Thank you very much. And I hope everybody is constantly in an engagement with perception beyond what they could be previously. Take care.